How can you fix the big problem with Bianti's VR and VS Commodore V8 supercar? In this video, I'll show you. We'll start by pulling the car apart, modifying and resetting the axles, adding some aftermarket decoration, plus a couple of other subtle enhancements to lift the realism of this die-cast model. The example in this video is the Peter Brock Mark Skaife Holden Racing Team VS Commodore from the 1997 Primus 1000 at Bathurst. But the problem and the steps to fix it apply to all versions of this casting, such as the Gibson Winfield cars, this Brock Mazira VR from 1995, plus plenty of other HRT machinery. At first glance, these 1/43 scale die-cast models are really nice pieces. They appear to be well proportioned, have good paint and decoration, and plenty of interior and even underbody detail. But as you can see, the wheels are tucked way too far inside the body. This is nothing like the real car, and I think it looks ridiculous. I find it strange that Bianti tooled up to manufacture the model like this. Years prior, the company had been involved with the AutoArt VX and VY Commodores, which were spot on in this area. So I'm not sure how this fundamental measurement got screwed up on the VRs and VSs. It really detracts from what is otherwise a brilliant model, but we can fix it. We're going to modify this model. I realise some collectors go into shock when they hear that a limited edition diecast is no longer mint. So if you think what we're about to do is a sin, tell me off in the comment section below. First job is to pull the model apart, and you'll need a Phillips head screwdriver for this. Be aware the two screws that attach the model to the base are different, so don't get them mixed up. The front screw has a finer thread as it screws into metal. The coarser thread is the rear mount and screws into plastic. We don't need to do a total dismantle, but the chassis plate needs to come off. On these models, they're held together by two small screws, but these are hidden by the splitter under tray at the front and the fuel tank at the rear. Removing these parts is the biggest risk of the whole process because they are easily damaged. You need something really thin to insert in the gaps to carefully pry the parts off, but be careful. On a previous model, I had the front splitter break into two pieces. Anyway, once these are off, the screws are revealed and the chassis can be carefully removed from the body. There's no need to remove the interior or windows, so the body assembly is put aside for later. The primary issue on these models is that the track width is simply too narrow. The wheels are not spaced out wide enough to fill the wheel wells. Swapping the existing axle out for a longer piece would solve this, but then there'd be too much side play, though that could be resolved. But the other significant thing is, with a solid straight axle, there's no camber on the wheels, and in this era of Australian supercars, they ran quite a bit of negative camber, particularly on the front. What I do is cut the axle in two, then fix each piece back into the chassis, but spaced out wider and at an angle to get the track width and camber to be more realistic. I use a two-part epoxy glue to secure the axles to the base, but this does mean the wheels will no longer rotate, which I think is an acceptable payoff for the big improvement in the overall stance of the model. It is a bit time consuming. The epoxy glue gives a few minutes work time to get the axle in position, and this involves placing the body in position to ensure the wheel location is correct regarding the width and camber and toe. I line it up by eye and wait for the glue to go off enough so the parts don't move. Then it's basically rinse and repeat for the other end of the model. If you do this mod yourself, don't forget the brake discs have to be fitted on the axle behind the wheel as part of the process. They are located by a small tab that fits into a cutout in the chassis plate. Next thing, the model does not include any Bridgestone markings on the tyre sidewalls. Not sure why, because my other Bianti HRTs, like the Brock Mazira car, came with them. Tyre decals were sourced from Paddo's Place, and with these ones, the radius of the decal is really close to that of the tyre, so the fit is good. They went on easily, and I used a little of Microscale's Microset to help them adhere. I've applied the markings at random rotations of the wheel, which I think looks more genuine than those posed PR images where the branding is always at the top. I've also added a tiny amount of panel line wash to the wheel nuts to provide some depth and bring out the detail. While the body was off, I added some dark blue paint to cover the exposed white areas around the edges of the livery, which were not white on the real car. I think this helps the overall look of the model when viewed from certain angles. Reassembly is straightforward. Refit the chassis under the body and screw it back together. A touch of CA glue holds the splitter in place, and Tamiya extra thin cement fixes the fuel tank back to its locating pins. If you display your models on the plinth, consider this next trick. Before fitting it back on the base, shave a little off the spacer that sits between the model and the plinth. This allows the car to sit a little lower and get the tyres back in contact with the base. Otherwise, the wheels might be dangling in the air. If you display your model directly on the shelf, don't waste your time doing it. So, screw the model back on its base, not forgetting the front and rear screws are different. The certificate of authenticity for this range of models resembles a credit card and clips underneath the display plinth. The cover goes on, back into its box, and in this case, ready to ship back to its owner. I think the model looks far better than before. But not everyone agrees with modifying a die-cast model. Do you think this one looks better? Or should collectible die-cast be left alone to preserve the mint condition? Let's know in the comments. If you want to see how to create a model of a model that was never created, check out this video on how to build the Garry Rogers Motorsport Valvoline wildcard entry from Bathurst in 2020.